Bronx Pride CEO, Black trans man Sean Ebony Coleman talks about why the LGBTQ plus don't support each other. Recently, queer news anchor Al Ferguson sat down with Sean Ebony Coleman. He is the founder of the LGBTQ Center, known as Destination Tomorrow, and is the only Black transgender grant writer in the country, helping to distribute grants for the Gilead Science TRANScend community impact. Watch this.
In an era of Donald Trump, the radical GOP, a Supreme Court that may limit or even reverse LGBTQ plus rights, an America that is grappling with race issues from Black Lives Matter to white supremacists, and what states are doing in dramatic anti-trans laws in health, sports, schools, and more. It can be a very scary time for members of our LGBTQ plus community. Activist Sean Ebony Coleman represents a unique intersection of so many of these topical issues. He is founder and executive director of Destination Tomorrow, a grassroots agency, and the LGBTQ Center of the Bronx borough of New York City. Destination Tomorrow runs Bronx Pride. He is a Black transgender man who also runs the Bronx Trans Collective. His Twitter handle perhaps defines him best as, quote, a political nerd and know-it-all from Brooklyn finding his way in the world, end quote. To help us better understand the intersections that I just described, we welcome Sean Ebony Coleman to Queer News Tonight. Good evening, Sean.
Hello, Al. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much. We're very happy to have you with us tonight and introduce you to our LGBTQ audience. Let's begin right out of the gate about your organization in the Bronx, Destination Tomorrow, and your Bronx Pride event. Tell us a little bit about the two organizations.
So Destination Tomorrow is the Bronx LGBT Center. What we wanted to do is our center is rooted in economic empowerment, right? The Bronx is historically a Black and brown marginalized community, all right? And we wanted to make sure that the center, as well as the programs and services that we offered, represented the community members in a way that provided them with the tools they need to be successful. So things like GED, job readiness, financial literacy, professional development. Those were things that we wanted to make sure our community members had access to. We also wanted to make sure that community members did not have to leave their borough or their neighborhood in order to obtain these services. For a long time, when you think about LGBTQ services in New York City, historically you'd go downtown to Lower Manhattan or somewhere in Manhattan to receive these services. And I just didn't feel like we had that it was necessary. Bronx Pride, which we just had, and we had an amazing time, it's really just a celebration of the LGBTQ folks, residents, community members in the Bronx. Wanted folks to understand that there's a thriving LGBT community here, and we wanted to celebrate too. We've been doing the event since 2005 when we were a part of the Bronx Community Pride Center, which the old LGBT center here. They closed in 2012, and we just continued it on. We've always had a really, really great outpouring of community members, not just Bronx residents, but other folks from the other outer boroughs attend our event as well. And we just wanted to, give back to community, especially since we've been inside for so long.
I think it's always so interesting as you talk about Destination Tomorrow and being a 501c3. We at Queer News Tonight have talked so much in the last couple of years about the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, as America knows, New York was for a time ground zero, literally, for COVID-19. It always fascinates us how our 501c3s survive, the funding challenges, the fundraising challenges. What has it been like for funding for transgender, non-conforming agencies like yours? What has it been like?
That's a loaded question, but I'm going to do my best to answer it. Without COVID-19, funding for trans and gender non-conforming led organization has been a bit difficult, right? I think you have to first understand that when it comes to funding, there's not a lot of equity. Right, when there's this huge disparity with regards to who actually receives funding for these types of services when it comes to a non-for-profit. So we were already, as a trans agency in general, receiving about maybe, at one point it was 2 cents per dollar. Now it's about 4 cents for every dollar that's dedicated to the LGBT community. So we're already starting there, and then the COVID-19 pandemic kind of exacerbated that, right? It showed what we already knew, that there was this disparity that existed, but it also showed that the need was greater within our communities, right? Because for a lot of folks within, particularly the transgender non-conforming community, it wasn't safe to shelter in place, right? Or you didn't have permanent housing to shelter to, so that became a problem. Those folks that deal with isolation, depression, and anxiety, they now have to be alone somewhere, possibly without any other support that understood who they were. So we were dealing with these challenges as well. I think what happened to our benefit was that organizations, corporations recognized that, right? They recognized that these disparities existed, and they put together funds that would help particularly transgender non-conforming organizations and community members. Because a lot of the things, it was some things as simple as needing your cell phone bill, and then other things that were like wanting an organization that they would be able to go to. So as soon as we got the green light from the city, we reopened. And we put all the safety measures in place, but we wanted to make sure that our community members had a safe space that they can go to, whether it was just to hang out for a minute because they needed someone to talk to. We wanted to make sure that we were still going to be there for our community. But with regards to funding, it's always been a challenge. And COVID actually exposed that challenge to a lot of folks that we had been telling all along.
I think it's interesting when we were talking, you represent so many different boxes. You're a trans man. You represent the African American community, you represent the LGBTQ community, and you talk about commonality. I'm curious about where, from your perspective, we are in the LGBTQ plus community itself on issues of Black and brown. Are we doing a good enough job? Are we standing up well enough for the Black and brown community broadly and the Black and brown LGBTQ community?
I'd say more can be done. And I say that because I think even when we spoke about those disparities, right, I shouldn't be the only one that's bringing up the fact that there are these disparities that exist in funding and in services and in programs and just overall visibility. My white cis counterparts should also be having these discussions and holding themselves account, right? You can't say you're an ally across the board because it doesn't work like that. An ally has to actually show up and in ways in which the person needs them to show up. And in this moment, I need you to show up and say, yes, there's a disparity when it comes to funding. Yes, there's a disparity when it comes to representation. Yes, race is still an issue, even within an LGBT community. Like, where do we start? What kind of discussions should we be having? And we're not having those discussions. It's not to say that we're not doing any work. It's to say that more work can be done.
Let me counterbalance that. Here in Walton Manors in Fort Lauderdale, there's a lot of conversation about an overwhelming white propensity that may have race issues going on in our own LGBTQ community, of not being as open or embracing for Black and brown. Do you agree with that? That the white, especially gay men, white LGBTQ are not doing enough for Black and brown in America?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that statement, but I think it becomes like not wanting to appear to not know what to do, right? Because again, if you're an ally, you should understand what it is you should do. And I think in some ways, it's hard to put yourself in a situation or position that you haven't been in, right? Like sometimes I'll hear my white colleagues and they'll say, well, if with matters of the police, if you just don't resist, And it's like, no, but I can completely comply and still end up dead. Like, so that's not a reality for me, right? It's like they don't understand that lived experience, which is why when you're trying to put together a discussion around race, you have to like bring the party in who is most impacted by that who is most impacted. And I think once we begin to do that, yeah, you give up a little bit of control, and it may impact your bottom line. But if we're talking about being equitable, and if we're talking about being fair, and if we're talking about this harmonious community that we envision, we're gonna have to lose some things, and hopefully we gain more than we actually lose.
I want to also ask you about what we've watched in the Roe decision in these recent weeks, especially what Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas did. He took it a step farther. First, Thomas is protected by 1967's Loving versus Virginia that granted constitutional protections for interracial marriage, which he is afforded. If the same justifications that Thomas is questioning in terms of sodomy laws, in terms of contraception, in terms of gay marriage, which he has suggested in his affirming support of the reversal of Roe, it seems it would apply to 1967, the Loving decision on interracial marriage. I'm curious from your perspective, these different boxes you tick, what's going on with Justice Thomas? Not to say that you can speak for him, but I'm just curious in terms of the insight you might have for LGBT America listening to you. What's going on with him?
You know, I've tried to process that, like what the rationale and the thought process. And it's incredibly hard to, because I don't understand how any man, whether they're black, white, brown, whatever, can overwhelmingly make decisions that don't necessarily impact them, right? How do you decide what a woman can ultimately do with her body, and then take it 3 steps further and say what someone can do in their bedroom and who someone can marry, but not yours, right? So I think it's all about control, in my opinion, and I'm lost as to how whether Thomas believes that if ultimately control is to be had over folks, how he doesn't include himself in folks that are being controlled, right? If the thought is that minorities are going to be the ones who are going to lose rights and or power, whatever little power minority folks have, how he doesn't see himself in that same light. So when folks speak about race, I'm not sure if it's just race or if it has more to do with power, right? And when folks have power and privilege, it's incredibly hard to kind of step away or lend it to others, especially others that you have no understanding of. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Brother Thomas doesn't have much understanding when it comes to his LGBTQ siblings.
I want to take it even a step farther in your representation, and that's, of course, talking about trans issues in America. We have watched in the past, Queer News Tonight has very closely reported on the amount of violence and even murder that takes place in America, especially to trans women of color. In the last 12 months, this has escalated far beyond that. We are watching an almost unconditional war declared. You know, we talk about it as the culture war, but it hits the trans community front and center in terms of sports, in terms of healthcare, in terms of states' issues for education. We're sitting here in Florida in the ground zero of Don't Say Gay, and Don't Say Gay is really first and foremost aimed at the trans community, all of the LGBT community, but first and foremost to the trans community. From your perspective, you have a lot of different hats that you're wearing representing our community. Why? Help us understand why they're so scared. You're a trans man. You're a black trans man. Why are they so scared of you?
I don't think they're scared of me. I think they recognize that they can use me and my uniqueness as a way to further divide folks, right? So I'll give you an example. When we did marriage equality, we were all in for marriage equality. Everybody across the rainbow was all in for marriage equality. I advocated for it. All of my friends advocated for it. It was what we were adamant that we were going to have the right to marry, and we put together an amazing machine. Right, it was a fundraising machine. It was advocacy. It was outreach. We had a ground game. We were all in, all 50 states, and then we accomplished it. And the next natural thing I thought we were going to do were trans rights, and instead, we walked away as if we had accomplished our mission. And I think to your question, too often that happens. Right, too often it's like, okay, this is done, and we'll go back to that whole white cis queer men or gay men that they've gotten what they need, right? And we work with them to get what they need. And now it's like, oh, but this doesn't really impact us. You don't really need to, I don't really understand it myself. Those kinds of things, rather than just coming out and fighting on behalf of the same folks that fought on behalf of the issue that you needed. And then the other thing is, I don't think we make enough noise about it, right? If this was white gay men being murdered in the street, it'd be an epidemic. We'd be all in the street. We'd be marching to every city hall. We'd be at the White House. We'd be writing letters to everybody. It's black trans women and to some extent black trans men, because we don't get reported in the same ways. We get misgendered even more. But these are black and brown trans bodies that are being killed, and no one's raising hell about it. And I think that is the point.
Sean, you're absolutely crystal clear on what you just said. It must be incredibly heartbreaking to you that's especially white gay men, that's how we're, from your viewpoint of how we're responding. It must be heartbreaking.
It's incredibly heartbreaking, but we're always up for a challenge. So the challenge is to make sure that we speak in a language that is not offensive, right? That we call in. And I'm saying to you, we need you the same way you needed us to get bills, but when it was the AIDS crisis and the marriage equality and every major issue, we were there, and we need that same kind of support and allow us to lead in those moments, right? It doesn't always have to be white cis led. There are some amazing black trans leaders across the state, across the nation. Like, tap into them, ask us what we need, ask us how to organize within our communities, give us the resources, or point us in the right direction for those resources, and then support us.
I want to ask you specifically inside the T of our acronym. Of course, you were a black trans man. In my work at Queer News Tonight, we have escalated over the last couple of years our education in the trans community a lot. I for one, have learned a lot about the trans community in the last couple of years. I have heard so much discussion from trans women that they feel that because trans men are much more passable than trans women, that trans men do not support trans women to the same degree as trans women do of men. What do you think about that observation? Is that true? Is that not true? What do you think about the support trans men have of trans women in the community?
I think it's just another way that folks will use to try to divide us. I think within my network of trans women and trans men, we support each other equally because we all understand what the mission is, right? And the mission is to make sure that our community is represented. The mission is to make sure our community is heard. The mission is to make sure that we increase the visibility, that there are black trans folks that are actually doing significant work. To your point, I think in certain spaces, we are kind of, I don't want to say pitted against each other, but they'll make it, there's room for one trans person, right? And if you got room for one, you got room for more. But there's room for one trans person. So if you got a trans guy there, a trans woman can't come and represent. Even though we have totally different issues, even though we're going to have totally different speaking points, like we have to make sure that these organizers are also, these funders are also not pitting us against each other. But that begins by us calling attention to it and calling it out. Whenever I have an opportunity, I make sure I reach out to my trans sisters, because I want you to see diverse representation. So I have a Black, brown, indigenous, everybody I want to come to the table, because I want folks that have historically not seen trans representation to see the diversity that exists within our community. And I'm hopeful that others will do the same.
Yeah, it's an interesting observation. It gives me the opportunity to ask your note that you make about funders that help support our community and seats at the table. You are the only Black transgender grant maker in America. My goodness, that is incredible. Your efforts have helped distributing nearly $1 million in funding with Gilead Sciences TRANScend Community Impact Fund. Tell us, well, first off, congratulations, and what an achievement that is for a Black trans man. Congratulations. But explain to us what the fund does and your participation in it. How does that work?
So Gilead is an amazing partner in that they listened, right? Some of these same speaking points that I'm using today, I used with Gilead to make sure that they understood that there was this funding disparity that exists, and that when you put money into an LGBT pot, it doesn't necessarily mean that the T is going to get adequate funding in order to move their mission and issues along, and in order to build sustainable organizations. So what Gilead did was Gilead gave us $1 million, and they allowed us to identify small grassroots organizations. And when we say small, your operating budget had to be under $250,000, and we would gift them or grant them funding to help build sustainability. But the other thing that Gilead did is they had a capacity building that came with it, right? Because it's not enough to just give folks money. We want to make sure that they understand how to run viable organizations. When you hear non-for-profit, you're just like, oh, it's not really a business, but it really is a business, and it needs to be set up as a business. You need your accounting needs to be in place, your legal needs to be in place, bylaws need to be in place. So we wanted to make sure that we were giving them the support that they needed to ensure that their organization would grow, that there would be some sustainability, and then we did it on a national lens. So we're looking at all states and spaces that historically did not have trans representation, right? So spaces like Georgia and Alabama and Tennessee and those spaces to provide the support needed so that we could grow these organizations. And we've done very, very well.
Yeah, and Gilead should be congratulated for their participation of making this program happen. And it reminds me, as I'm thinking about your answer about what you do as the first Black trans man in America involved in a funding program like this, and how we elevate portions of our LGBTQ community. I think about our acronym. We changed it, if you remember. Our acronym used to be the GLBT community. And then we changed it to LGBTQ to strengthen our stance and elevate our visibility for lesbians. I'm curious, as you were talking about that, would our community be stronger if we changed it to TLGBTQ? Or not TLGBTQ, TLGBTQ. Would we be stronger?
Some folks in the community are already doing that, putting the T first, right? Because it shows that their priority, that they're prioritizing the T. Unfortunately, it's within trans communities that are actually doing it. It'd be amazing if some of our L, G, and B counterparts would also recognize that shows where the priority is. But then I don't want it to just be surface with changing the acronym around, right? I want us to come up with a way that we are truly putting the T first. Whether that means when we're advocating for additional resources, whether that means when there's an opportunity for increased visibility, that we're looking to that trans organization in your backyard that's already doing amazing work and just uplifting them. So yes, change the acronym around. that would be wonderful. But also put some substantial programming in place that shows that you're prioritizing the trans community.
Sean, I'm curious, talking about black and brown and trans, our acronym for gay men, lesbians, queer affirming. Do you have hope that we'll find this collaborative nature and work better together to make a stronger community? Do you have hope?
Of course, I think it already exists. I think we just have to have some conversations. We need more conversation. We need to talk to each other, right? We all work in these silos and we all do amazing things separately, and it just doesn't make sense. So I have incredible hope. I have hope for the future that we are going to, and not just within the LGBT community, right, but within the black and brown community as it relates to the LGBT community. As a black man, I know sometimes my own community looks at trans folks like, oh my, I can't, I don't understand. I'm not going to deal with them. This just doesn't make sense. This is an abomination. And we need to have discussions, because as a black man, I recognize how our community is under attack. You remove the fact that I'm trans, I'm still a black body. So when you see me in the street, the first thing you see is black. And we have to make sure that we're working together. So these discussions have to happen. We just have to make sure, which is why I'm so appreciative of you having me on your show tonight, because it gives me an opportunity to like extend an olive branch. Like let's figure out how we work together. You're in Florida, I'm in New York. These are two I don't want to call them hotspots, but we organize. We know what it looks like to organize. So what does a joint organization look like? What does mobilization look like between New York and Florida? How do we make that happen? Those are the things that I want us to start talking about. Let's remove all of the nonsense, because at the end, our lives are at stake. Our freedoms are at stake, even more so than before. So we just have to figure it out. But I'm incredibly hopeful that we will figure it out.
Yeah,
we don't have a choice.
Your words ring well with me. Our print magazine in Florida is called Hotspots Magazine.
Hotspots, see?
And our goal at Queer News Tonight is to talk. So
Yes.
We're right there with you. I want to ask you one final question. Here in Florida, we always ask about Fort Lauderdale versus Miami, Broward County versus Dade County. I'm curious, for LGBTQ, Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, Bronx, let's divide and conquer. Who's the best?
Oh, the Bronx, baby. The Bronx, we're doing it big. Our event this year was amazing. It's growing every year. We're coming from Manhattan Pride.
Are you? Okay, very good.
Yes.
Sean, this has been a pleasure talking to you. I joke with you at the top. I feel like I'm talking to 5 different personalities representing our LGBTQ community, and that's quite a compliment to you and your work at Destination Tomorrow. One last thought. The organization, I'm sure this is observation's been made to you repeatedly. I personally loved the name of your organization in the Bronx, Destination Tomorrow, because just like in the Broadway musical Annie, you are always dreaming of tomorrow and you never get there. Your destination is never getting there.
Yep.
And that means we're always working harder to have a better tomorrow. That's wonderful.
Yes. And that was the entire point of the name. We're always growing, so we're looking to tomorrow.
Sean Ebony Coleman, thank you very much, and we'll have you back again at Queer News Tonight. LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Lara are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out television network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBTQ plus community.